Welcome everyone. I'm here today with Tariq Khan, founder and CEO of Global Diversity Marketing, along with Vince Vitello, president of Global Diversity Marketing, and Chris Ackerley, director of operations, Global Diversity Marketing. Gentlemen, it's wonderful to have you here. It's certainly been a minute since we met at Gamma in Las Vegas a few years back, and the world clearly has changed. Can you give me a little bit of background on yourselves and the genesis of Global Diversity Marketing? Maybe I'll start with you, Tariq.
Yeah, thank you, Roland, for giving us this opportunity. My name is Tariq Khan, and I'm the founder and CEO of Global Diversity Marketing. I have been in professional services for the last 25 plus years. And throughout this career, my passion was really the changing face of America. I saw the opportunity. US is unlike any other country in the world, like India or China. Everyone is Indian or Chinese, but we really have a very significant presence of diverse population. So after spending many years in corporate side and leading up their diversity initiative and recruiting and marketing, I started Global Diversity Marketing in 2010 with a passion that how can we bridge the gap or identify the gap that exists between the distribution and the end consumers. And we have attracted some industry leaders like Vince Vitello, who have been committed to diversity and inclusion throughout their career, and be a part of this journey that how do we really bridge this gap and bring the consumers closer to the advisors who really not only look like them, but really understand their needs and wants.
Excellent. Excellent. Vince.
I'll give and thank you, Tariq, and thank you, Roland, for having us. I'll give more of a personal story, and I think Tariq has given a really good overview of what our mission and what we do. But my grandparents were immigrants from Italy, and actually my dad was born here in US in New York. And my dad went into the financial services business. And in the old days, financial services representatives in the life insurance business would typically get a geographical area to actually sell to and also literally pick up premiums and go house to house to house to pick up premiums. And that was my father's role when he first started as an advisor for many years. And the area that he was given in New York City was the Italian American area. And the reason for that was because he spoke two languages. And I think as I look back of why I have a passion for the multicultural markets and the ethnic markets, I think it goes back to when I would ride with my father when he'd pick up the premiums. And I would see the relationship that he would have with clients. And they became our friends, and we would bring food home, and we would bring pets home, and it just became a family issue. And so in the area where we all live, Tariq live and I live now, is the Italian Americans and the Jewish Americans have moved out to the suburbs. And what has repopulated those areas, exactly where I grew up, have been Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans. And so it's a generation removed, but it's the same exact ethnic experience of why financial advisors are really important. And the first thing is language and just being familiar. And just having a little bit more knowledge. My dad wasn't educated, but a little bit more knowledge than the customer had, that he was able to dispel to them about mortgages and college planning and death and how much it costs to bury a person. So that's where I think the genesis of where I came from.
That's great. Yeah, and Chris, welcome.
Thanks, Roland, for having us. Yeah, so I got into this business because I had a passion for marketing, but I also came from a little bit of a liberal arts background where, diversity was kind of looked at from a different perspective. So putting those two things together with Global Diversity Marketing really is a perfect fit for me.
Awesome. All right. So as you gentlemen know, in the financial services industry, we have an aging agent and advisor demographic. 70% of advisors today don't have a written actionable succession plan. And for those within 5 years of retirement, they don't have any strategy in place. How concerned are you guys, coming from the financial services industry about the future of advice?
I'll jump on that, and Tariq, I'm sure has additional information. It's interesting that there's an industry shift going on, and what a lot of the carriers have begun to do is direct to consumer. So not going through an advisor to give advice. And direct consumer is interesting, but it's really not advice. It's just an application, and it's a life insurance policy. One of the major reasons that the carriers are doing that is they don't have advisors that can connect with millennials. And as Tarek will tell you, half of the millennials are not Caucasian, or more than half of the millennials are not Caucasian. So the carriers have been neglectful in recruiting diverse advisors. And so carriers that say, hey, we don't have the advisors, let's just go direct. But that direct is, to me, very, very short-sighted. So to your point, Roland, the advisors are getting older, obviously getting older in their 60s, 70s, 80s. There is no succession plan for them. And there really is no succession plan, not just for their own business, but there is no succession plan on how to advise this millennial generation that needs advice. And you can't get advice just from going online and looking at a life insurance policy.
No doubt. No, Tariq, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think like Vince alluded, that it is very important for people to understand that most of the people who started 25, 30 years ago in the business, let's say I'm John Doe and I started in this business, I first sold life insurance policy to those clients. And as they progressed in their life, I sold them asset management and more of investment products. And many of them have not sold life insurance other besides doing estate conservation cases. And what they have not realized is that it's not the only ethnical change that you're seeing. Like Vince said, it's a generational change, gender change, and the ethnicity. So the new consumer that's stepping into the market is a multicultural young woman. And it's very difficult, and I'm not saying women only buy from women, but when you look at the overall advisors landscape, only 15% of our advisors are women, whereas their population is 51% and the workforce representation is 47% women. So there is a huge disconnect, and it's very difficult for us to really fill in the gap unless we take a proactive approach to bring more millennial, more women, and more multicultural into the workforce. So until that is done, the succession planning is there are going to be huge gaps. And like Vince said, that people are going to go direct, and that's going to happen what's happening to brick and mortar retail, that Amazons of the world are coming in and they are filling the needs. And the next generation is completely disconnecting. And that's why we're seeing companies like, JCPenney is struggling.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's transition a little bit into diversity in financial services for a moment then. So 3.5% of the 80,000 CFPs in the US identify as being Black or Latino, which is significantly less than the US population. I'd argue that it's probably very similar with respect to CLUs in the insurance industry. And by 2045, people of color are projected to be the majority of the US population, which I think you've already alluded to. So the supply of diverse financial professionals isn't keeping up with the demand of an increasingly diverse consumer base. Can you comment on the current state of racial diversity in financial services and insurance services as you see it today?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good point that you make, Roland. And I'm not seeing the Asian numbers in the CLU and CFPs, but I'm sure that those numbers are higher. I can give you an overall landscape of the advisors business. If you look at Hispanic Americans now represent almost 14 to 15% of the total population. Guess what is their representation in financial advisors? Only 6%. Blacks represent almost 12% of the total population, and their representation is 8%. Now, there is only one ethnicity which is over-indexed, which is the Asian community. With 7% population, they are 19% representation in the financial advisors. So if you really look at the per rep average of an Asian American, it's much higher. Now, I'm not saying that Hispanics will only buy from Hispanics, but look at the current circumstances. How could any wealthy Black family would not prefer to do business with a Black advisor? How a woman who's very accomplished in her career would not want her advisor to be a woman? So unless we really take a proactive approach, and not only diversity recruiting, because recruiting, even if you don't do anything, you're going to get more diverse recruit. but we have to build a conducive environment where they can stick to the business. And unless you really understand what their needs are in terms of training, development, and onboarding, you will be bringing them in and you'll be losing. So that's why we call the inclusiveness. And it's very important for companies to understand that their training has to reflect that their customers are changing. Customer means their producers are changing, and they have to have an appropriate training that can really cater to this market.
I concur with what Tarek said. And Roland, you brought up the point of, I think, 2045, the year 2045, which if you're an executive in the financial services business and you're a 58-year-old male, 2045 is 20 years after you retired, and it's really not a concern for you. However, the 2045 is already here in the major cities. Is already here. So if you look at the 10 major cities in the United States, Caucasians are the minority already. So for executives or companies to say, well, this is something that's on the horizon, or this is a 20-year plan, it's not true. So in New York is over 65% non-white. And so if you want to sell to a transit worker or a police officer or a school teacher, typically that person will not be a Caucasian person. They're younger. The younger generation happens to be brown or black or Asian. So I think a lot of folks say this is emerging markets. In the major cities across the United States, it is the market. It's not the emerging market. And how do you penetrate the market?
And so many firms are beginning to see the link today between diversity, inclusion, and these failing transition or succession programs that they're having that have failed internally. How can you guys further elaborate on how you feel maybe the two can be intertwined?
Yeah, Vince, you want me? Okay.
Go ahead. Sure.
So I think there is a huge mistake as an organization sometimes we make. We treat diversity and inclusion as a check the box initiative, and we always react to situations. Right now, every company is having, communication letter from CEOs about, George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. And yes, they are very, very important issues. I don't want to deviate our attention. But at the end of the day, for an organization, if you want them to act proactively and fully engage, and you have to make a business case out of it. And when you miss the point about the business case, so, when Vince was giving his father's example, 40 years or 50 years ago, when he got into the business, he was probably one of the visionary person who saw the opportunity of another market. But there are many other Italian Americans along with him who probably failed in the business because they just really did business as usual and did not see that opportunity. But he envisioned that there is a huge niche market segmentation that exists, and I could really complement my business. So the companies have to understand that this is a business growth opportunity. If you want to grow your business, it is very difficult for you to ignore 76% of the total market. When I say 76% of the total market, if you combine women, multicultural, millennial, they represent 76% of the market. So most companies really have a business or marketing strategy for 24% of the market. And that's a bad strategy.
Yeah. And Roland, I think if you look at the two buckets you just discussed, and one is the internal diversity, and then is marketing and leveraging and monetizing it. And I think some companies skew one way or the other. So if you're skewing towards just the diversity issue as how do we build a diverse team, yes, it can help you. But eventually the business leaders will say, tell me about the revenue that's coming from there. And typically revenue is a long ways away when you're building just the diverse team. On the other hand, on the marketing side, what happens is, and Tarek brought this up earlier, if you're bringing in marketing and sales and financial services people without creating the climate internally for them to stick, the analogy is doing a heart transplant to a person and just doesn't work, it doesn't stick. So you've recruited all of these diverse individuals to your organization, but for the internal, they don't feel comfortable with. I was with an Asian American just this past week who works for Deloitte. He's a young man, he's an immigrant from China. And he said, and he's doing very well. He said, I just don't feel comfortable. I don't feel comfortable in the setting. I just don't feel like they've embraced me as an Asian American. Now, that being said, I think there's a lot of Asians in Deloitte, but he just doesn't feel comfortable. So he's actually thinking of leaving, and he probably want to be in a firm that's more diverse and more inclusive and makes him feel comfortable.
Yeah. So many great points, gentlemen. I think about, what you mentioned, Tariq, about, the making it part of the business, and not making it a checkbox. It's fascinating that the number of Black CFPs are on the decline, where, diversity programs and companies seem to be increasing, right? And so I think it's a testament to, the importance of, really making it part of the business, as you mentioned. Can we dive a little bit further into that? You gave a few statistics on the business case. What is the business case for firms, dealers, carriers, distributors in insurance and financial services that want to enhance their D&I initiatives?
Yeah, and I'll go back to my original statistics that if you look at it, it's very simple. If you get into the marketplace, you open up a restaurant in a neighborhood and you say that this neighborhood is my target audience. And if you make a business plan that I will only cater to 24% of this target audience, you're already, putting yourself in a difficult situation. So any company that does not have a strategy to attract more women, more multicultural, and more millennials to the business is really making a mistake. And just don't take it for granted that, once you open business, everyone will come. Today, the consumer is in the driving seat. Women, really like to connect with Fenty. Why Fenty is a makeup line? Because Rihanna, when she started the business, she has more shades and lipsticks and eyeliners than any other company, because she understands the need that her women clients really are very diverse, and the companies don't understand. The customers really dictate that this is how. So it's very important for companies to understand. And I'm not saying that everyone you should have the same strategy. If you're in South Dakota, maybe you don't need ethnic diversity, but you definitely need generational and gender diversity.
Yeah, and Roland, to Tariq's point, to emphasize, looking at a specific city, you could take Chicago or Los Angeles or New York or Miami. And so if you open up that restaurant in our financial services business, it's really skewed towards male and older males. And so assume for a second you are opening up this restaurant and you're using the template for financial services where only males are going to be customers, because male to male. And so in New York, if 70% is non-Caucasian and 30% is Caucasian, that means only 15% of the 30% are males. So in Tariq's example, now you've cut even that 30% in half, because the males are typically going to sell to the people that they play golf with, or they play cards with, or they socialize with. So those figures are even, so the revenue part of the opportunity part is, hey, you're starting a financial services business and you're in the major cities in the United States, and you're working specifically just in the male-dominated area because all your representatives are male-dominated. It's a very small sliver. Roland, we use the term, and by the way, I'm a member of this club. It's called male, pale, and stale. Male, white, and old. And that's what our financial services business has become. And if you look at any one of these organizations that are struggling, and you walk into a producer meeting, you'll just see old guys there. And they haven't seen, and now there are some organizations that are doing great. So half of New York Life's field force is not part of that club. And they're doing extremely well because they've gotten into the ethnic markets and focused on hiring and training ethnic and diverse people.
So what advice do you have for those firms, whether it be gender diversity or ethnic diversity, that want to attract the best talent in order to create, this advisor population that reflects the changing client demographics?
I think first of all, there is a three-step process. Number one is that you really have to make a commitment, and the commitment is not done by a mid-level person. It has to be by the senior executive, top executive. The best is when the CEO is committed to something, things can happen. So number one is commitment. Second is you really have to have a very strategic approach to it. And if you don't have right people in your organization, work with outside resources to make sure that there is a plan to it. Just by wishing that you want to be a part of it, it's not going to work. And then you really have to execute that strategy. That this is our and remember, whenever you want to grow into a new market, if you go to a new country, you give yourself 5 years to really break even. Diverse segments is not something that first year you don't see results, you're going to pull the plug and abandon the program. It will take some time. But if you make a long-term commitment, you'll start seeing the results. And eventually, this is all about sustainability. If you don't have a plan like this, then it is very, very difficult for you to survive in the business for the long term.
Yeah. Roland, to Tarek's point, is we always talk about having the senior executive or the CEO make a commitment, because this isn't easy stuff. It's a very, very large cultural change. And typically you're going to get into a pushback from the good old boys that say, we're not ready for this, or it's just taking too much time. So it's really, really important for the senior executive. The second step is to look at what the gaps are in your value proposition. And it's really difficult for the current leadership team to look at what the gaps are, because they are part of the value proposition. And so just to give a commercial about Tarek and ourselves is, hey, we're outside group that look at what the gaps are. And I need to give you one very quick example. If you're a bank doing business in Chinatown and on your ATM, you don't have Chinese symbols on your ATM, a typical recent immigrant really can't do business with your ATM. Now, that might sound very simplistic, and I never thought about that until I went to China. And when I went to China and I needed to take money out of an ATM, I had to look at my phone to see what my password was, how it corresponded to their ATM. And so as a white person, I would never have known that. So as an executive of a company, what are my gaps? Well, I think everything is great because I'm the executive, the senior guy of it, and I think there are no gaps. So what are the gaps? What would attract an Asian American or an African American? What would attract them to the organization? And more importantly, what would get them to stick with the organization?
Wheels are turning. Guys, that was great. Could you maybe wrap up and tell us a little bit more about, and you're probably living under a rock if you don't know about global diversity marketing, but how is it that you guys specifically help organizations execute in this rapidly changing marketplace?
So we have three verticals of the business. One is the global diversity marketing, which is a consulting business. And whether you want to learn about the research that, how the demographics are changing, how many Asians live, how many Hispanics, what would be the future trend. So we can provide you the full assessment of the marketplace. We also help you develop a strategy that how do you get into women's market? How do you get into LGBTQ market or any niche market that you want to get into? So we help you develop a complete strategy. And third is not only that we give you a strategy, we work with you to execute the strategy. So we roll up the sleeves, we become your partners in long term just to make sure that there are no hiccups. So that's the strategic part of the business. The second is Global Diversity University, which is training and development platforms. We have 50 plus courses in all formats. If you want distance learning, which is very common today, self-paced courses that people can learn about this opportunity, or you need blended version of face-to-face. So that's the part which is training and development. And we have courses about diversity, leadership, or even sexual harassment that people are mandatory in many places. And the third is a coaching part, where we work with executives. So, Vincent or I would spend time with a C-suite executive and talk to them from a perspective that why it is important for you to really buy into it. And there are a lot of times that people or companies really don't understand that, what they're missing out. So Vince and myself, we will go and spend the whole year and periodically we'll check on them and provide them all the executive coaching and consultation that they need.
Yeah. And Roland, just to add one other part, I think a differentiator that we have as a firm is that we really know this space. And so Tarek nor I would really had to prepare for this call because we just know the financial service space better than anybody else because we both have been brought up in this space. And so we may not be the consulting firm for every business, but for financial services and understanding the nuances of how to solve the issue, but also what the issues are, it's kind of second nature to us. And that's what's our differentiator.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's so clear to our audience. Guys, thank you so much. You know, global diversity marketing, such an important, purposeful business. Really an honor to have you guys on the ContinuityCast today. Tariq, Vince, Chris, thanks so much for your time today.
Okay, do appreciate it, Roland. Thank you for having me.